Something is out there in the Australian Outback that nobody has fully explained. Ancient stone circles arranged with mathematical precision, carvings that predate recorded human history by tens of thousands of years. Geoglyphs so massive they can only be seen from the sky. Structures that align perfectly with star systems their builders had no way of knowing about. Australia is one of the oldest continuously inhabited landmasses on Earth. Aboriginal cultures have lived here for at least 65,000 years, possibly longer. That is longer than any other human civilization we have verifiable evidence for. So when researchers stumble across something they cannot explain, the silence from the mainstream academic community tends to be very telling. Today we are going into the deep red heart of the Australian Outback. We are looking at 13 ancient structures that have baffled archaeologists, geologists, and historians for decades. Some have been quietly documented and left largely alone. Others have sparked genuine international controversy. A few remain almost completely unknown outside the small communities that live closest to them. These are not myths. These are real places, real coordinates, real physical structures sitting in one of the most remote and unforgiving landscapes on the planet. And the questions they raise about who built them, when, and why have never been satisfactorily answered. Australia does not talk about these places the way it should. Today, we are going to change that. Structure 1. The Marree Man of South Australia. In June 1998, a light aircraft pilot flying near Marree in South Australia looked down and saw something that stopped him cold. Carved into the red earth was a figure of a man holding what appeared to be a traditional hunting stick. The figure measured 4.2 kilometers from head to toe. The lines etched into the ground were up to 35 meters wide and 30 centimeters deep. From ground level, you would see nothing. From the air, the image was unmistakable. No one has ever claimed responsibility. In the weeks after its discovery, anonymous faxes arrived at local hotels and a police station containing cryptic clues. One referenced an American military installation in Nevada. Another quoted American presidential speeches. The faxes stopped as suddenly as they started. No footprints, no tire tracks, no satellite imagery captured any construction activity in the area before the figure appeared. The Australian government investigated. Independent researchers followed. In 2016, a team from Flinders University confirmed that the lines were cut with extraordinary consistency across undulating terrain, maintaining depth and width over kilometers of difficult ground. To accomplish that with modern machinery would be challenging. To do it in complete secrecy would be nearly impossible. Who built the Marree Man and how remains completely unsolved. Structure 2. The Wurdi Youang stone arrangement of Victoria, roughly an hour west of Melbourne, near the town of Little River, sits an oval arrangement of basalt stones that most Australians have never heard of. The site is called Wurdi Youang, and it has been studied by astronomers, archaeologists, and geologists since it first drew serious scientific attention in the early 2000s. The arrangement consists of more than 90 stones, some weighing several hundred kilograms each, placed in an egg-shaped pattern, roughly 50 meters across. What makes Wurdi Youang remarkable is not its age or scale. It is the alignment. Stones at the western apex point directly toward the setting sun at the summer solstice, the winter solstice, and the equinoxes. The precision is not approximate, it is exact. Astronomer Dwayne Hamaka of the University of Melbourne concluded that the Wathaurong people built Wurdi Youang as a working solar observatory. If correct, it may predate Stonehenge by thousands of years, making it one of the oldest astronomical observatories ever identified on Earth. The stones were transported from a basalt outcrop roughly a kilometer away. Why that location was chosen and what ceremonies took place there remain questions archaeology alone cannot answer. Structure 3. The Gosford Glyphs of New South Wales. About 90 kilometres north of Sydney, in sandstone ridges above Gosford, there is a sheltered alcove containing something that has divided researchers for decades. Carved into the walls of this small space are what appear to be ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs, more than 300 of them, covering two facing walls in dense, deliberate compositions. Ray Johnson, an Egyptologist who examined the site in the 1990s, translated the inscriptions and claimed they described an ancient Egyptian expedition to Australia approximately 5,000 years ago. According to his reading, a royal party arrived during the reign of a pharaoh's son and several members, including a high-ranking official named Lord Jezeb, died and were buried somewhere in the surrounding region. The academic mainstream has largely rejected this interpretation. Critics point to inconsistencies in hieroglyphic grammar and a mixing of styles from different historical periods. But others note the sheer difficulty of carving hundreds of consistent glyphs in hard sandstone without detection, and that Aboriginal communities have known this site for generations under names suggesting something unusual occurred here. No comprehensive forensic dating has ever been conducted on the Gosford glyphs. Until it is, the site remains genuinely unexplained. Structure 4. The Murujuga engravings of Western Australia. On the Burrup Peninsula, in the Pilbara region of Western Australia, there is a concentration of ancient rock art so dense that researchers are still working to understand what they are looking at. The Murujuga engravings, also known as the Dampier Rock Art Precinct, contain more than 1 million individual petroglyphs spread across a landscape of red granite boulders covering 40 square kilometres. The oldest engravings are estimated to be at least 30,000 years old. Some researchers argue for dates approaching 50,000 years, which would make them the oldest representational art ever found anywhere on Earth. The images include animals extinct for more than 15,000 years, including the thylacine, depicted in detail that suggests the artists observed these creatures directly. Beyond the volume of art, specific areas show deliberate arrangement of engraved boulders, suggesting that parts of the Murujuga complex functioned as ceremonial spaces with intentional architectural logic. The site sits adjacent to one of Australia's largest industrial complexes, and decades of activity have already destroyed an unknown number of engravings. Murujuga received UNESCO World Heritage status in 2023. The damage done before that recognition cannot be undone. Structure 5. The Panaramitee petroglyphs of the Flinders Ranges. In the remote reaches of South Australia's Flinders Ranges, at Panaramitee Station, an extraordinary collection of engraved stones was documented in the 1960s by archaeologist Norman Tyndale. What he found was a style of rock engraving appearing across hundreds of separate outback sites, from South Australia through the Northern Territory into Queensland, sharing such consistent geometric patterns that researchers recognised it as a distinct artistic tradition spanning the continent. The Panaramitee style is defined by deeply incised circles, tracks, and geometric shapes. The figures are purely abstract. They carry no faces, no narrative scenes. Thermoluminescence dating at several Panaramitee sites has returned ages between 20,000 and 35,000 years before present. What no one has explained is why this geometric language appeared across such a vast geographic range with such consistency. Were these marks connected to a shared ceremonial system? Were they navigation markers for cross-continental travel? Were they recording something about the landscape? The symbols recur with a precision that demands meaning. That meaning has never been recovered. Structure 6. The Wilgie Mia ochre mine of Western Australia, about 500 kilometres north of Perth, in the Murchison region of Western Australia. There is a place Aboriginal Australians have mined for an estimated 30,000 years. The Wilgie Mia ochre mine is not a naturally exposed deposit. It is a worked, structured, deliberately excavated site with tunnels, extraction faces, and access paths that show evidence of sustained, organised human effort across an incomprehensibly long period of time. Ochre was among the most important materials in ancient Australian culture. It was used in ceremony, in burial practices, and in trade networks stretching thousands of kilometres across the continent. Analysis of ochre, found at burial sites across southern Australia, has been chemically traced back to Wilgie Mia, suggesting the mine supplied material to communities on the far side of the continent. What was accomplished here using only stone, wood, and fire is genuinely difficult to comprehend. The site contains evidence of stone tools, extraction scaffolding remnants, and carved rock faces that indicate a level of mining organisation not typically associated with this period of human history. Wilgie Mia is still considered sacred by the Wurdi Youang people. Access is restricted. Much of what the site contains has never been formally studied, and there is no current plan to change that. Structure 7. The Ewaninga rock carvings of the Northern Territory, about 40 kilometres south of Alice Springs, the red sand flats open into a low clay pan edged with sandstone outcrops. This is Ewaninga, a registered heritage site containing one of the most concentrated collections of petroglyphs in Central Australia. The carvings cover exposed rock faces in dense overlapping compositions of circles, spirals, dots, bird tracks, and deeply incised geometric forms. What makes Ewaninga significant, beyond its visual density, is that the style of carving here appears unrelated to more recent rock art traditions found elsewhere in the region. These engravings show none of the figurative imagery or animal representations that characterize art produced by ancestors of the current custodian communities. They are geometric, abstract, and deeply worked in ways that suggest considerable age. The Aranda people, traditional custodians of Ewaninga, acknowledge the site as ancient and connected to the dreaming, but oral tradition does not explain these particular forms. Some researchers have proposed that the carvings may predate the current custodian culture by many thousands of years, representing an earlier population whose identity remains unknown. No comprehensive dating program has been completed here. The site is open to visitors but receives almost no attention compared to better-known outback locations. Structure 8. The Lake Mungo Ancient Hearths of New South Wales. Lake Mungo is not a lake. It has not held water for at least 15,000 years. What remains is a dry lunette, a crescent-shaped formation of wind-deposited sediment on the eastern shore of a long-dead body of water in the far southwest of New South Wales. Within that dried landscape, archaeologists have found evidence of human activity that fundamentally changed our understanding of how long people have lived in Australia. In 1969, geologist Jim Bowler discovered cremated remains of a young woman in the Mungo sediments. Subsequent dating placed her remains at approximately 40,000 years old, making this the oldest known example of deliberate human cremation anywhere on Earth. A few years later, a second burial was found in the same area, dated to between 40 and 42,000 years ago, and covered in traces of red ochre, the oldest known example of ochre burial in the world. Beyond the burials, the Lake Mungo site contains remnants of structured habitation. Ancient fireplaces, arranged in patterns consistent with repeated use and deliberate site management, have been identified throughout the lunette. Their placement and spacing suggest communities that organize space in ways that parallel the structured settlements of much later human cultures. Australia had ceremonially aware, spatially organized communities when most of the world was still sparsely inhabited. Structure 9. The Quinkan Galleries of Cape York. In the sandstone escarpments of Cape York Peninsula in far north Queensland, there are painted rock shelters containing one of the most visually complex bodies of rock art found anywhere on the planet. The Quinkan Galleries, named after the spirit figures depicted throughout the paintings, stretch across a landscape of dramatic red sandstone bluffs above the Laura River. The paintings span thousands of years. The oldest layers, visible beneath more recent overpainting in certain shelters, date to at least 15,000 years before present. The subject matter includes animals, ancestral beings, human figures in ceremony, and the Quinkans themselves, tall and angular spirit entities in dynamic poses that suggest they were far more than decorative subjects to the people who painted them. What makes the Quinkan Galleries structurally significant is the relationship between the shelters and the surrounding landscape. The shelters are not randomly distributed. They cluster along specific ridgelines, face particular directions, and are positioned in ways that suggest the entire landscape was conceived as an integrated ceremonial space. Individual shelters relate to each other visually and spatially, implying a designed system rather than a scattered accumulation of individual acts. Structure 10. The Baiame Cave of New South Wales. In the Boolth Hills northwest of Singleton, in the Hunter Valley, carved into a sandstone overhang above a small gully, there is a figure unlike almost anything else in Australian rock art. The representation of Baiame, the creator being central to the beliefs of many southeastern Aboriginal groups, stretches across the ceiling of the shelter in white ochre, approximately 3 meters in length. Around the central figure are smaller painted forms, including handprints, animals, and geometric shapes. The site is known to have functioned as an initiation ground. The rock shelter and its surroundings contain evidence of repeated human occupation across a very long period, including grinding grooves worn into adjacent sandstone by generations of tool preparation. What distinguishes Baiame Cave from other sites in the region is not only the quality of the central figure, it is the precision of its placement. The cave is oriented so that at specific times of year, natural light enters the shelter and illuminates the figure of Baiame with extraordinary clarity. This is not coincidental. The same intentional use of solar light has been documented at significant sites from Newgrange in Ireland to the temples of Abu Simbel in Egypt. The people who created Baiame Cave understood solar movement well enough to engineer a light effect into a rock shelter. Most visitors to the Hunter Valley have never heard this site exists. Structure 11. The Chambers of the Black Range. In the remote country north of Broken Hill in New South Wales, where the barrier ranges give way to open gibber plains, there are sheltered rock formations known collectively to local researchers as the Black Range Chambers. These are not large caverns. They are low, flat-roofed shelters in fractured quartzite, many of them barely accessible to an adult moving on hands and knees. Inside these chambers, carved directly into the roof and walls, are geometric forms sharing stylistic similarities with the Panaramitee tradition found further north and west. But several of the Black Range chambers contain something additional, evidence of deliberate structural modification. Stones have been placed to block certain natural openings, creating enclosed spaces within the formations. In one chamber, a flat slab has been positioned horizontally across two supporting rocks to form a low platform approximately 40 centimeters above the floor. No convincing explanation for these modifications has been produced. The spaces are too small and isolated to have functioned as dwellings. Several show evidence of sustained fire use in specific central positions, consistent with ritual burning rather than casual habitation. At least 3 documented chambers face directions that align with astronomical events. The Black Range chambers have received virtually no formal archaeological attention. Most of what is known comes from a handful of independent researchers who have documented the sites over the past 4 decades. Structure 12. The Karlu Karlu stone arrangements of the Northern Territory. About 100 kilometers south of Tennant Creek in the Northern Territory, the landscape opens into something that stops most visitors in their tracks. Giant rounded granite boulders, some standing 6 meters tall, are balanced and stacked in configurations that appear to defy gravity. This is Karlu Karlu, known in English as the Devil's Marbles. The boulders are the result of geological processes working on granite over hundreds of millions of years. That much is agreed upon by everyone. What is less agreed upon is the role these formations played in the ceremonial life of the Warramungu, Kaitetai, Aliawari, and Walpiri peoples, whose country this has been for tens of thousands of years. The site is a registered sacred site, and specific ceremonial knowledge remains held within the custodian communities. But researchers working alongside those communities have documented stone placements, some clearly of human origin, positioned among the natural boulders at precise locations within the complex. Several stone arrangements at Karlu Karlu align with solar and lunar events visible from specific vantage points within the boulder field. The custodian communities have indicated that the full significance of these arrangements cannot be communicated in the language Western archaeology typically uses. Karlu Karlu receives thousands of tourists every year. Almost none of them know that the landscape they are walking through contains deliberately structured elements that have never been explained. Structure 13. The Morningstar alignment of the Great Sandy Desert. In the Great Sandy Desert of northwestern Western Australia, accessible only by 4-wheel drive tracks, crossing hundreds of kilometers of spinifex and red sand, there is a location that barely appears in published archaeological literature. Local researchers working with custodian communities in the 1990s documented a series of stone lines and cleared pathways extending across a flat claypan surface for approximately 3 kilometers. The stone lines are not large. Individual rocks are fist-sized pieces of ironstone, placed in precisely parallel rows at regular intervals. The rows run in 2 directions, creating a grid-like pattern across the claypan surface. At the southern end, a circle of larger stones encloses a central cleared space roughly 10 meters across. Elders from the Martu community have indicated that the site is connected to the Morning Star ceremony, one of the most significant ceremonial cycles in this part of Western Australia. The geometry of the arrangement corresponds to astronomical alignments connected to the visibility of Venus as the morning star. Venus rises at this latitude at an azimuth that aligns precisely with the orientation of the stone rows. No formal excavation has taken place here. No scientific study has been published. In an era when satellite imagery can locate structures on the other side of the planet, this site in the Great Sandy Desert remains almost entirely undocumented. 13 structures. 13 sites where the evidence does not match the story that mainstream archaeology has been comfortable telling about ancient Australia. The assumption has long been that pre-contact Australia was simpler, less organised than the great civilizations of the ancient world. The sites we have looked at today challenge that assumption at every level. The oldest continuously practiced astronomical tradition on Earth is not in Egypt, Greece, or Mesopotamia. It is in Australia. The oldest known examples of cremation, of ochre burial, of long-distance trade in standardized goods, all trace to this continent. The structures in the Outback are not anomalies. They are evidence of a civilization so ancient and continuous that we are only beginning to form the right questions about it. Should Australia be investing more in the formal study of these sites before industrial development, weather, and time destroy what remains? Or is current heritage protection sufficient? Leave your thoughts in the comments. The conversation about what ancient Australia really looked like belongs to all of us. If this documentary opened a door you want to keep walking through, subscribe and turn on notifications. New investigations go up every week. The story of Australia's ancient past is far from finished, and neither are we done telling it.